Welcome to Chatting Shit with Ostique, the podcast series where we chat about shit with inspiring people from all walks of life. Today, we are joined by the wonderful and inspiring Adam Alderson. We hope that you enjoy this conversation. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us, and thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to speak to you today and for you to share your amazing story of both resilience and bravery and proactivity. But to begin with, would you mind introducing yourself and please telling us how you came to kind of have your stoma and a little bit about you?
Yeah, thanks for having me firstly of all. I've watched quite a few of these now, and obviously we've met once or twice before, and it's nice to be here and share this. So, my name's Adam Alderson. I'm 44 now. I'll be 45 in May, so I'm creeping up in age slowly. But I'm actually lucky to be making 44 or 45 because 10 years ago it really didn't look like I would get that far. It's been a long road and it's a long story, so I'll try and keep it as brief as I can. But let's take you back to 2011 when I emigrated to Australia with my girlfriend at the time, Laura, long term, and we got transferred out there through my wife's job with Lloyd's and started a new life. We had no intentions of coming back. We sold my business, we packed everything up, we rented our little house out, and off we went for a new life. And what a life it was. We just had the best time. We quickly settled in, we made good friends, a lot of English and Irish friends, and Australians as well. You know, we really settled into the life in South Australia in a little suburb of Adelaide near the beach. So our life was good, and I've worked in tree surgery and forestry all my working life, so I went back to that, working for a company over there, met some great lads within that team that became good friends. Our daily routine was get up, go to work, come home, straight to the beach, have a swim, back home, barbecue 9 times out of 10, a few beers, and it was just a great life, you know. We loved it, and we made so many friends, and we settled so well. Now, I'd had kind of abdominal problems for quite a while, sort of at least 10 years really before we moved to Australia. I'd had stomach complaints and I'd seen my GP numerous times, I mean maybe 20 at least, over that 10-year period, and I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome a long time ago, and they put me on the usual stuff, and I always knew in the back of my mind, though, I thought, I don't think it is, you know. I always thought it was maybe much worse, and however, I just did what I was told, and off we went. But my symptoms were getting a little bit worse, so not only was I getting abdominal pain and kind of this uncomfortable bowel movements and things like that, but once we got to Australia 2 years in, I started to see blood in my stool, and I was getting much worse, you know. I noticed that I was getting quite fatigued and more unwell generally. I just wasn't myself. So luckily with our arrangement of going over there, Laura's company had us under the best healthcare possible, private healthcare, which is what we have to have over there. Obviously, there's no NHS like here. And I went to see a doctor over there, and he instantly there and then said, Adam, I want you to go for a scan. So he sent me right round the corner to a radiology centre. And at first I had an ultrasound, and I could see straight away by the people around me looking at the scan, I sensed that something was wrong. They kept going out and getting another colleague to come back in and have a look, and I sensed something was wrong. So once that scan was over, I was told they wanted to then perform a CT scan. And at that time, none of this meant anything to me. You know, I was just doing what I was told. So I went into the giant polo that it was back then and had this CT scan, and then waited a few days before going back to my GP to see what they'd found. And I remember we couldn't get parked, and Laura had to sit in the car outside just in case the traffic warden came in. So I went in on my own, and when he was giving me the news, he was obviously reading the notes for the first time. He hadn't previously read them, and he was going through the list of, yeah, that's okay, that looks good. And then there was a long pause, and I knew at that moment that his next words weren't going to be good. And he said, look, they have found something. There is an abnormality within your abdomen, and we want to get it looked at a little bit further, which means sending you to hospital to see a colorectal surgeon, and we'll pass all your notes over and everything. And I asked at the time, is this cancer? And he said, difficult for us to say at this point. It's a disease called pseudomyxoma peritonei, or abbreviated PMP. I never heard of it. It was just gobbledygook to me. It meant nothing, but I instantly got Googling and read about it and thought, this isn't too good. So within a day or two, I went up to the hospital, and I was really lucky actually, because I got to see an English professor that wanted to have a look at me, and his registrar was also a young guy from the UK that had worked in Manchester and had seen this disease before. It's very rare. It's about 1 in a million people, maybe 2 in a million now. We're finding it more. And they suggested that we do a laparoscopic biopsy. So Christmas Day came, and there was a little bit of a fiddle there because there was such a long waiting list. They couldn't get me in that quickly, so they suggested I presented myself at A&E. I literally came out of the hospital round the back door and then presented in A&E and got sent straight back to the same people again, just as a way of, there's always a way to speed things up a bit. So off I went to theatre, and they did 3 little incisions, one for gas, one for a camera, and one for a biopsy. Quite normal, dead easy, straightforward. And then Laura came. We didn't really see anyone after that. We were discharged on Christmas Eve, and the nurses said, go and have a nice Christmas and come back in the new year and we'll have a chat. So off we went, Christmas Day on the beach with my 3 plasters on my stomach, kicking a ball about and just carrying on as normal, really. So yeah, we just got on with it. But in the back of my mind, I always knew something was there. So fast forward a week, and we went and saw the team, and unfortunately said, it is what we think it is, and it's a widespread tumour within your abdominal cavity. It's everywhere. It's kind of crushing all your major organs. So he then said, the next thing I'm going to tell you, you're not going to like. And I thought, God, what's he going to say here? Is he going to give me 6 months to live or what? He said, you're going to have to go back to England. And I'm like, is that it? Nothing else? And he said, no. He said, the best thing to do is get you back to the Christie in Manchester, which is a specialist peritoneal malignancy centre. There aren't many in the world. You might have one in each country in the West, but they're rare. So over the next kind of few weeks, we started talking to them over the phone or the internet during the night because of the time delay, and they made preparations for me to come back and be referred into their care. And that felt like it was taking forever because we had to pack up everything. All our furniture went in a friend's barn, which 10, 11 years on is still in that barn. Our little car is still over there. And we just packed up because we didn't know if we were going for a month, 6 months, or forever. So one good thing to come out of that was the insurance company paid for us to come back business class, which was probably the one and only time that I will ever fly business class. And what a joy it was. It was great. Right from the limousine picking us up to dropping us off, everything was great. With Emirates as well, which was super. So we made the most of that, and we left in about 30 degrees Adelaide sunshine and landed in North Yorkshire to -4 and snow. It was a big wake-up call. But yeah, that was the way it was. We couldn't get back in our house at that stage. We had it rented out, so we had to go and live with my in-laws, which is never good. And wait for the appointment. So kind of did that bit, got that bit nicely out of the way. But at that stage, I still wasn't really sure what was wrong with me or how serious it was or what was coming. I still thought we would go back. I thought we'll deal with it and eventually we'll go back and pick up where we left off. But that wasn't to be. When I was first presented at the Christie, I saw a specialist surgeon there, and The initial consultation was quite negative. It felt negative, and something he said to me that really stuck was, "We will do our best for you, Adam." And that stuck round in my head. I thought, that doesn't sound very, very positive to me. So anyway, he booked me in for surgery, and the surgery they wanted to do is called a cytoreductive surgery coupled with HIPEC. So let me explain. Hyporeductive surgery is basically they make a huge incision from your sternum to your pubic bone. They open you wide open, and they try and kind of scrape and suck all of this horrible jelly-like tumour from the gaps and crevices between the organs. This disease doesn't actually get into the organ itself. It just slowly crushes it by growing and then turning hard, and then it kind of crushes it, and you end up in complete intestinal or organ failure. So it's a very difficult procedure to scrape this stuff away, and it takes about 18 hours. Any normal surgery for that would take a long time. And then they introduce a heated chemotherapy called HIPEC, and they wash this heated chemotherapy around the abdomen, around your organs for about 90 minutes to try and kill off any elusive cells that might be lurking that they cannot see. And then they zip you back up, you lose your belly button, you end up with an ileostomy at first. And prior to my surgery, we, like most colorectal surgeries, we presented with a stoma nurse to come and say, this might happen, or this will happen, whatever they think. I didn't even know at that time what a stoma was. I had no idea, never heard of it. And I was of that ilk that a colostomy bag or a bag for your poo was just what old men have. That was all I remember as a child, was it being quite a horrible thing, really, and that was in my mind. And I think a lot of people that are listening to this that have a bag will recall that feeling of, this is just for old men. It can't be happening to me. 6 months ago, I was strutting around on a beach in Adelaide, swimming in the sea as a fit young man, and here I am about to have this bag fitted, and it hit me hard. It did at first, and I just kind of, I'm not a religious man, but I did pray that it wasn't going to happen. And I remember waking up, and one of the first things I did, and I guarantee listeners will understand, was I put my hand down onto my stomach to see if I could feel anything, and sure enough, I could feel this bag. But with that, I also remember hearing Jeremy Vine on the radio and thinking, he shouldn't be on about now. He should be on, this should be the middle of the night for me. And it wasn't. So I knew that we hadn't been in surgery that long, only a few hours. And sure enough, the surgeon came over to me and said, I'm sorry, Adam, once we got inside, we realised that the disease was much more widespread than scans had indicated, and it was just impossible to remove any of that disease. It's just everywhere. So he said, I'm afraid we just had to take a look. We took some biopsies, and we'd give you an ileostomy. And I also had a feeding tube out of my stomach as well, which at that time was this huge, great big catheter tube that they just sort of grabbed off the shelf to stick in quickly, because they didn't have a proper, they're called a button, and they're just a tiny little thing that sticks inside your stomach with a little cap on, and it's for feeding later. But they didn't have one available, so they stuck this catheter tube in, which was all coiled up like a hose pipe and was quite frightening at first. I'm sort of like, what's this? And they explained. And then I was wheeled off to I remember Laura coming actually, and Laura looking over me, and I said, it hasn't worked. And Laura just saying, I know, darling, but we'll figure it, don't worry, we'll figure it. So we had a few days or weeks in hospital to recover. Saw my stoma nurse as well, which I will say, she was absolutely amazing. And in my experience, all of them are the ones that I've had experience with. They are fantastic people. They look after you very well. They are sensitive, knowledgeable, and very useful to have in your life as an ostomy patient. I think they are. They're great. Mine was great at the Christie. I still keep in touch with her now. So we went home and recovered for a few months, and back to the Christie for a meeting. They thought maybe we can try some chemotherapy now. Chemotherapy rarely ever works for pseudomyxoma. It's more of a symptomatic kind of palliative thing that they do to help with pain and things like that. But I thought at that point, well, anything's worth a try. So I had, 9 months of chemotherapy, which was rotten, absolutely rotten, just at my local hospital. And following the scan, it showed that the tumour was growing, just still growing, even on chemo. So they actually wanted me to carry on with it, but I said no, I'd had enough. That I'd rather live life, the bit of life that I've got left, feeling okay, than go through this. So we stopped that, and I began feeding through my tube in my stomach. But by now they had put in like a little button, so it was just a tiny little thing that poked out the side of my stomach, and I used to connect to that on a night, and that would feed me this gloopy liquid throughout the night, and then disconnect in the morning. At that stage, I could still manage a little bit of low residue food, soups and skips and quavers and things like that, just for my own satisfaction. But I think around that time, we were approaching kind of 18, 19 months post-surgery, and I started to really rapidly decline. I was getting bowel obstructions, immense pain. I was on a lot of morphine and other medications. My wife and I actually trained to do the intravenous stuff, so we both did a phlebotomy course so that we could manage the intravenous drugs, and if I needed some fluid, we could get a cannula in and give me some fluid, because where I live, we're like a good 2 hours from the nearest hospital up here in the Yorkshire Dales in the middle of nowhere. If it's serious, it's a helicopter job, so we can't just keep nipping in to get that done. So we trained and we managed all that ourselves at home, and still to this day I can put my own cannulas in and give myself some fluid, and still do. But things were getting worse, and I was finding myself ambulanced into hospital with bowel obstructions, and life was pretty grim. So I took some time in a hospice, our local hospice, 2 hours away, to give my wife a break, really. She was tired, and it was rough on her, so she needed a break. So I went in there for a few weeks, and while I was in there, I had my phone, and I was just Googling around for doctors or surgeons that might be able to help or give me an opinion. And I came across a guy down in Basingstoke who was a bit of a guru in this disease. And when I mentioned his name in a patient forum or group on Facebook, everyone was just singing his praises. So I thought, I need to see this guy. So independently, I emailed him, not through the team or anything, and said, look, this is my situation. Would you have a look at me? And he came back and he said, yep, absolutely. Send me your scans and information, and we'll make an appointment. So we did that. And I will say the Christie were quite negative about me doing that. They weren't pro second opinion. They weren't keen on me going down there. But I'm quite determined when I put my mind to something, and I don't like being told no. So that was the plan. He looked at my scans and still agreed he would see me and try and help. So he made an appointment for kind of 6 weeks down the line, which was a long time at that point. And I got really sick during that time, and again, ambulanced into hospital. And I had one of the worst nights of my life where I was so obstructed that I was throwing up my own feces on the floor of a hospital toilet, with my wife shouting, "Get an NG tube in, get him a line in." It was really disappointing how we were treated, and we seemed to know more about it than they did at that stage. And Laura was holding my head while this was going on, and I still remember it now. The moment I realised what I was throwing up was the most demoralising, humiliating, sort of horrible moment ever. and I was so tired, I'd had enough. And they got me sorted, you know, they got an NG tube in my nose where we were able to aspirate my stomach contents all the time. Even though I'm not eating, your stomach naturally produces secretions and liquid without anything through your mouth. So you're constantly building up a fluid within your stomach that has to come out, otherwise it'll just get stuck and then it needs to come out my mouth. So we were aspirating that off. And the next day, the doctor at this is my little local hospital, came and said, you know, we're nearing the end, Adam, now, and we need to make some difficult decisions. Do you want to stay here? Do you want to go to the hospice, or do you want to go home? Because you are in the last stages of life, and, you know, it won't be long before you start shutting down. And I got quite upset by this, and they had a DNR form as well, a do not resuscitate form, and asked me to sign that, and I screwed that up and threw it on the floor. I said, no way, I want to go to Basingstoke. They've agreed to see me, get me down there. So he reluctantly went off, and I remember him coming back in the next day, and Laura was with me, and I was a little bit abusive to him, actually, and, you know, I apologised to him later, and at the time my emotional state wasn't good. I was under a lot of stress, and I was upset, and I told him to foxtrot Oscar out the room, and he came back and he said, look, I've spoken to Basingstoke, and they still want you to see you down there, and we're just waiting for a bed for you now. And at that point, his phone rang in his pocket and said, this is them. And we could hear the other end of the conversation, and the nurse say, yes, we've got a bed for Adam now, so as soon as you like, get him down here. And I remember squeezing Laura's hand next to me, just thinking, yes, we're finally going to see this guy, which I'd read up about and watched videos of him, and he'd kind of become a bit of a celebrity idol to me in a way. So I got taken down with my medication. By now, sorry, just to skip back, after that bowel obstruction and that horrible evening, they put me on total parental nutrition, or TPN, which is a line fitted straight down into your heart or your main artery, and you are fed via a machine 12 hours a day with a specialist liquid that, you know, gives you all the nutrients and protein that you need. So that was me nil by mouth now, completely. Nothing. I couldn't eat anything at all. I was just fed by this machine. So I went to the Basingstoke Hospital with my machines, with the TPN on, syringe drivers, NG tube, all this. You know, I looked like a walking sort of robot of some sort. And saw the team down there. They wanted to give me new scans, so we had scans done, and then waited for this man to come and give me a decision. Now, me and Laura had a conversation where we said, if this doesn't come off, if he says there's nothing can be done, then we're going to go home. We're just going to take some time for ourselves, and I'll pass away, and that's it. We're not chasing rainbows anymore. We're just going to accept it and just love each other as long as we can, and that's that. So we knew that if this was a negative or a no, then we were prepared as we could be. And sure enough, he came in and said, unfortunately, Adam, I've looked at your scans, and his words were, I've actually lost sleep over this. He said, because I just can't see a way of doing it. He said, it's everywhere. It's all over your stomach, crushing your stomach like concrete. You're in complete intestinal failure. Your pancreas isn't working. Your liver's crushed. It's an absolute mess in there, and it's impossible to get out. So in a last-ditch attempt, I crawled out of my bed and knelt down in front of him and said, this lightly, but I am asking you to please try to remove this. And I said, I don't care if you kill me in surgery. I'll sign what you want. Just try. I do not want to leave this hospital without something. So he said at this point, he said, there is something we can try. He said, we've only done it a couple of times before, and it's kind of worked, but unfortunately the first couple of patients haven't survived. But he said, I think you could be a good patient for this. 1, you're really determined. 2, you're young. And 3, you haven't had any major surgery as such, because that's major surgery creates scar tissue and all this mess that they've got to fight through to find organs and veins and arteries and things. So I hadn't had that. So he thought actually it might be quite clean in there, and referred me to Oxford, which is an intestinal transplant unit. There's only 2 in the country, really, 2 good ones, Papworth and Oxford. And so we drove home with a sense of hope and a new chapter to maybe look at. But I was referred straight from there up to Newcastle's intestinal failure unit, where me and Laura could train to do home TPN. We could manage it at home. It's an aseptic technique, so there's quite a lot to learn in terms of being safe with this. The last thing you want is an infection. That can be deadly. So we had to learn, and it's really, it's not an easy process to manage. So we spent at least a week learning how to do this. And whilst I was in Newcastle, I got the call from Oxford saying, we want to see you and discuss your case and things like that. Now, I'd never even heard of a bowel transplant at this point, really. I didn't even know they did them. I thought it was like someone saying you're going to the moon. It just didn't really settle in. I didn't really believe it until they rang, and I thought, maybe this could happen. So, yeah, we then made another journey down south to Oxford to see this team. And I remember we're all crammed in a little room like sardines, loads of people, and young people as well. And they said, yeah, we've looked at your scans and everything. Not a problem, Adam. We can do this. Dead straightforward. Don't worry about it. And we were kind of blown away by, are you sure? Have you got the right scan? And he said, yeah, not a problem. What we want to do is get you down here for a week to do some full tests of everything, and then we'll know better then that it's doable. But at this stage, we think we can. So I went home for a little while and waited for the call to go in and do my tests, which was about, I don't know, a few weeks later. They called, said, yeah, come down. And I stayed in the hospital, and every day was tests from lung function right through to cytology. That there's a big psychological impact on a patient having someone else's organs transplanted inside them. So they work with you to understand that you are okay with that mentally, that you're going to be able to cope, and they talk you through the process. One of the things that I was going to be given was an abdominal wall transplant, which meant from my sternum to my pubic bone in a kind of teardrop shape, a big teardrop shape, would be someone else's skin that would come across with my internal organs. And they do that for 2 reasons. One is it's a bit like a pie lid, because organs don't always fit straight into another patient, and I was a skinny patient at that time, so they needed skin to kind of fit it all in. Plus my tumour had started to grow out of my ileostomy and out of my feeding tube as well. It had just pushed out through the side of that, so they had to remove it all. So psychology talked to you about that as well. You're going to have someone's skin, it's going to be a reminder, but the skin actually protects us against rejection, which I'll come to. So yeah, we did a week of that, and then we went home and waited for the call from Oxford to say yes or no. Yes, we're going to list you, or no, I'm sorry, we can't. So the next few weeks were rough, really rough, and at 9 o'clock in the morning in July 2015, I got a call from Oxford to say we've reviewed all the results and we're happy to put you on the list. So as of now, we are actively searching for organs for you. Now, I was going to need 8 organs removing and 6 putting back in. So they needed a good donor for me. So we kind of just sat back and waited for the call, really. They said it wouldn't be long, but we didn't know. And that day again was probably another pretty rough one of my life, where I was in so much pain lying on that sofa that I was trying to bang my head off the wall to knock myself out because I could not cope with the pain anymore. And I had morphine patches on my back. I was drinking morphine like it was lemonade. I had a port in my leg subcutaneously that Laura was giving me subcutaneous morphine as well. Couldn't do any more for my pain. So we had the anticipatory meds here ready for my end of life care. We called the doctor. My local GP came out and said there's not a lot more I can do. He took Laura to one side and said, over the next 24, 48 hours, Adam's going to pass away. He is at end of stage of life. And, you know, do you understand that? So Laura said, yeah, I'm totally aware of it. And that was that. Didn't tell me this till afterwards, actually, but that's what happened. So that night we went to bed. Laura connected me up to my TPN, gave me a massive hit of morphine, and off I went to sleep. And that was that. Then at 2 o'clock in the morning, the same evening, you know, not even 12 hours, the phone rang and said, "We found you a donor and we want you to come in." The thing is with transplant, it's tricky. You aren't guaranteed that just because they found a donor that everything is going to go ahead. You can have what's called a dry run, which means you get there and you either become too unwell or the organs don't match, the bloods are wrong, you know, there's a multitude of things. So you've got to prepare yourself that this might not go ahead. However, so we went down and then we waited about 8 hours and they did a load of tests on me again. And we wait and then the professor comes and says, "We've done the retrieval," and I hate that word, but it means, you know, going and taking the organs. And he said they're very good, and then they run tests on them as well. So they've got to look at that patient's history. Is there any cancer within this patient? Is there any chronic illness or disease, or are all these organs okay? So they've got to check everything and look back at patient history as well. This stuff takes time. But he said, as far as we can see, everything's good. So off we go to theatre. And Laura and I walked down there, went into the little anaesthetist room, and I was freaking out a little bit by that point. I said, "You're going to have to give me something to calm me down because I'm freaking out." We said our goodbyes. Laura went off and I said, "I'll see you on the other side." And I didn't mean it in that way. I just meant on the other side of surgery. But Laura saw it as I'd given up and that was me off to heaven sort of attitude. But I didn't mean it that way. And that was that. I didn't know any more really. I just got put to sleep and that was it. And I remember Laura saying she was quite relieved at that point that the pressure was off her now. It was out of her hands. She could just hand me over to that team and she could have a break for a few days, not having to do everything for me. So there was a little flat attached to the hospital that she could stay in, that they put her in there, you know, so she could be close. And over the next sort of 18 hours, there were 30 people worked on me in shifts. The first team was Basingstoke that did the removal of 8 of my organs. So they start with your esophagus, your stomach, duodenum, pancreas, small bowel, large bowel, appendix, spleen, gallbladder, abdominal wall, most of my liver, and a 10-kilo tumour. This tumour was huge, you know, it's massive. And so so it's a big job to get in around all the arteries and veins and important stuff to remove. It takes a long time, but they managed to get that out quite nicely. And at the time, they got as much tumour as they could see. They couldn't actually see anything else in there. I have a nice sort of, not a nice photo, but quite a dramatic photo on my phone of my surgeons, 2 of them holding all my organs in their arms. It's massive, you know. And then another photo of me completely disemboweled, everything out. You just see my bladder and my lungs, and we're now waiting for organs to come across. It's quite graphic, but it's a real wow moment. And then the transplant team take over to put in all the new organs, and again that takes time, but they managed to get them all in, and then got blood supply to them, and saw that they were working. That was great, and then took me off to recovery, to intensive care, where I stayed for a few days in an induced coma to let me recover, really, after such a massive procedure. And then I woke after a few days to Laura leaning over me, saying, you've done it, darling. You're doing really well. They've got all the cancer. Your organs are functioning. You're doing amazing. And I got really upset as I was crying, and because I genuinely didn't expect that. I really didn't, because I had so much negative outcome of everything all along the way. I wasn't really expecting good news. So she got the surgeon to come and say, yeah, we've got it, Adam, you're doing really well. You have a long road to go, but, get some sleep, you're going to need it. And we'll wake you up tomorrow, and put me back to sleep. And then the hard work began. That was the easy bit, really. The road to recovery from that was like nothing I could explain. Just lifting my head off a pillow was like running a marathon. It was so hard. But the physiotherapists come pretty quickly, because they don't want you lying in bed. That creates deep vein thrombosis and clots and a whole host of other things. So they want you up and moving. And they got me lifted out and into a chair, and day by day doing a little bit more. I always remember the red sheet, which is like a slippery sheet that they bring, and they put it under you so they can change your bed covers and your gown and things like that. And they used to come with that thing, and I just wanted to give them a load of abuse, because that thing was just awful. Like, they'd roll me around in pain and agony, and it was horrible. So yeah, eventually we got moved into the ward. Look, I can't say anything more great about the team around me in Oxford. They were fantastic every single step of the way. I was so lucky to have them. And then day by day, we got a little bit stronger, did a little bit more, another tube came out, and I was making progress. And then we noticed I had a rash on my abdominal wall, on my skin, which is my donor's skin. And that is a sign of rejection. We kind of knew that, and my doctors took a biopsy from it, and sure enough, I was rejecting organs, and this was like 6 weeks later. So that was a bit of a panic moment, and they took me back to ITU. They put me back to sleep, or under sedation at least, and intravenously give me something called methopred, which is an anti-rejection intravenous sort of medication to stop them organs rejecting. They called my family, and we called my friends, and said, this is serious. But I woke up, and they managed to get on top of it, which was good. And then 3.5 months later, they gave me a slap on my back and said, go home and live your life, Adam. You've done it. You're doing really well. Go and make the most of it. So off we came back to the Dales to live our lives, which was quite scary at first, because I didn't have these people around me anymore. And it's kind of like when you first pass your driving test and then you go out on your own, It's quite a strange feeling not to have that safety net. But sure enough, we started to get back to some normality, and lived our lives, and then the next chapter began.
Did you still have a stoma at that point after you had had all the surgery and sort of new bowels?
So yeah, apologies, I should have mentioned that. I then, during surgery, they switched me from an ileostomy to a colostomy, which I knew, again, coming out, I would have. By now, I'd lived with an ileostomy for 2 years, so I kind of got used to it. But yeah, I woke with a colostomy bag, which actually I quickly realised was much better to manage. It wasn't as frequent, a lot more solid, and I think by then the bags had moved on a little bit as well. Like I started to go on to like a 2-piece, so that I could just clip on and off. But I tried all kinds of things, as most patients will, before you find something that fits you and you're happy and comfortable with. So I still use that 2-piece today, so I can just clip on and off.
So that was despite having a new bowel. You still needed to have your stoma, as you say, from an ileostomy to a colostomy.
Yeah, so I do have my own colon. I have about 3 centimeters of my own colon, which is connected. So it's all there, all the plumbing's there, and they can put that back. If I really wanted to, I could push them and say, look, I want to have my plumbing put back to normal. But I'm of the mindset of it's not broken, don't fix it. I have no issues living with my ostomy bag whatsoever. I had no desire to have it switched back. You know, it doesn't always work perfectly. There's risks. And I just think I'm fine, leave me alone. So
Certainly had enough risk and other
yeah,
things in your life, exactly. And then, so following that, when you came home and you finally kind of maybe perhaps could breathe a sigh of relief, did not necessarily just having a stoma, but that kind of surgery, how's that changed your life? And what have you done since, or did you just go back to tree surgery, or how's your life changed?
massively, massively. It couldn't have changed more if I tried. In terms of that realization of just how precious life is and how close I came to losing that was something I'll never forget, and makes you realize that you've got to make the most of every second, you know. Now, by no means it's not practical or possible to just spend every day of your life being excited and woo, everything's great and yippee skippy. It's not. We live in a life where we have pressures and stresses and bills to pay and all that kind of stuff. But it will change things. Now, I'd been with Laura for 15 years. We were together a little bit when we were much younger, and then what she did for me throughout that journey was undescribable. And when you're so ill and you're looking up at this person as the only one that can really help you and all that, I decided to make an honest woman of her and proposed in the May of 2016, which she kindly accepted, and then we got married the year later. So that was the first thing I wanted to do, was start to sort of plan our future, you know, as a couple, as a husband and wife. Let's move on and do this. As you can imagine, that day was a big one and a very special one for us both because of what we just endured. Some of my surgical team were there. My palliative care nurse was there. BBC News were there. It was quite a big deal at the time. And a really good one. But next, whilst I was in hospital, I found this thing called the Mongol Rally, which is a charity event where you buy a kind of battered out old car, or you get handed one from your granddad or something, worth about 500 quid, and you drive it from Goodwood Circuit all the way across Europe and Asia through Mongolia and then up into Far East Russia, unassisted completely. You just set off and you're on your own. You plan your own route, you do your own visas and everything, and that was a massive thing. But I decided I wanted to do it, and I started watching videos and reading about it. It manifested into something that I really, really wanted to do. So I said to the team, "Look, guys, I want to drive a battered out old car across the world." And I said, "We've just spent over £1 million saving your life, Adam, and you want to go and get shot in Uzbekistan or somewhere?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely. You know, life's for living now. Let's go out there and do it. You can't wrap me in cotton wool." So it sounded straightforward at the time, but by no means was it. You know, we had to do all kinds of things. We had to make sure that all my medication came with me. I had to hide medication in the car. I took the roof lining out of the car and glued it to the ceiling so that if we had it taken off us at border patrols and things, at least we had some hidden so that I could take it. And the next thing that concerned me was my ostomy, my colostomy. We're going to go across the world in a little car, and I've got an ostomy. And, you know, once we get out of Europe and into Asia, things change. It's not quite like you've got a McDonald's coming up round the corner and you can use the disabled toilet to change your bag and, clinically get rid of your waste and all that kind of stuff. You are literally in a desert or some third world town that has no facilities or anything. So it took a bit of thinking about how we're going to manage this, what we're going to do. I probably overthought it at the time because it was fine. You become quite resourceful and resilient to that. As an ostomy patient out in the middle of nowhere, it's dead easy just to dash behind a tree or hide behind the car or something like that. And I'm quite resourceful in terms of we had like a little tiny toilet thing made up for me, and I could even use that whilst we were driving along if I had to, and it became something that I'd worried about and needn't have done because you can just manage it quite easily. Maybe the cleanliness of it was a bit of a worry, so we did check into a couple of nice hotels now and then so I could change back plates and make sure everything was okay. And that was going well until Kazakhstan. We crossed from Azerbaijan to Kazakhstan across the Caspian Sea. It took about 2 days to get across that. And then in Kazakhstan, it was 50 degrees for 7 days straight. It never let up. And we had a Suzuki chimney with no air conditioning or anything. And I started to get ill. I started to get back and side pain, and I was starting to struggle. So we had a satellite phone, and we were chatting back with the hospital to say what was going on. And actually, Laura managed to get a line in my arm, and I was in the passenger seat with a cannula in and a line and a bag of fluid hanging off the grab rail in the car while she was driving through the desert trying to get some fluid into me. And I was drinking Diorolite and things like that because I was dehydrated massively. That didn't work. I just started to get worse. So we spoke to the team again, and they said, look, I think you're going to have to come back. We're going to have to get you out and sort you out. But Kazakhstan was difficult. We were in the middle of nowhere. There was no airports or anything. So we pushed on for the next 4 days just to get across into Russia. And we got to a town called Barnaul in Siberia, which got me in a hotel just on the off chance maybe a little rest or something would pull me around, but it didn't. So I was medevaced out of Barnaul on a private plane back to Moscow, and then onto a general flight out of Moscow back to London, and then into Oxford. And when I got back, they quickly realised I was in kidney failure off the dehydration, so they had to intravenously put me on. Did they put me on a potassium nitrate? I think it was, or potassium sulfate, one of the two. They put me on that for a few days to try and relieve that dehydration and bring some kidney function back, which thankfully it did quickly. But I still had a stage 2 kidney injury in the process, and that was disappointing because the kidneys are my own. They're not donated, so we've got to look after them. And I was so poorly, they just couldn't understand how I'd even got back from Russia in the state I was in. There's a video on my social of me in hospital in Oxford when I just got back from that, and oh my, do I look ill. Skinny as a rake, just withdrawn, black eyes, I was really poorly. But
it hasn't put you off of extreme or sort of intense challenges. I know you'd potentially have one coming up.
Yeah, no, it hasn't. We've done loads of stuff since then. I flew back to Russia despite them telling me not to, and drove that little car all the way back up and around Scandinavia and home. I had to do that on the quiet without them knowing until I got back. And then we've done loads of stuff over the years, riding little motorcycles across Europe and things like that. And then Macmillan do this kind of flagship event every year held at York where they get 12 amateur horse riders, and we train for 6 months solid to become professional jockeys. And then we will race a horse in a mile 1 flat race at York on the 15th of June. in front of about 20,000 people, live ITV racing, and a lot more. So there's a lot of pressure. So I began training in December at a horse yard. I had a little bit of riding experience. Over the years, I'd rode a little bit, and I could ride my wife's horse kind of up and down the road and around the field a little bit, but nothing like this. Totally different way of riding is racehorsing as well. So there was a lot to learn. So I was in the gym 3 times a week with a personal trainer, running, riding the horse as much as possible, and pushing. And then only a couple of weeks ago, I started to get a bit unwell again. Really started to struggle, and thought maybe this is just dehydration once more, but it wasn't. So I've recently gone back down to Basingstoke for my 6-month scans. Just by chance, they were coming up anyway. You know, they didn't specially do this. They were coming up anyway. So I had my scans, and the scans show that there's a little bit of this sort of mucus coming back. It'll have been a tiny little piece of like a tiny cell hiding that's just very slowly over the last 6 or 7 years grown into something. It's just mutated and now is a little bit bigger. And I can kind of feel it on my abdomen there, a little bit of a lump. And sure enough, it's very, very slowly growing. So it's causing me a bit more pain now as well. So I've got abdominal pain, and they just want to watch and wait, because where it is very difficult to remove. It's kind of wrapped around a blood supply, and it's just not that straightforward. And you always run the risk of, if you go in and poke around, you run the risk of making that tumour angry, and it could then come back twice as fast and twice as aggressive. So you've got to leave things alone until you absolutely have to go back in. And my team have always been of that mindset. You know, we'll just keep watching it until it becomes a problem, and then we'll deal with it. Now, one way of dealing with that is to go back through the transplant again. So that would mean removing everything again and having new organs again. That isn't an unrealistic proposition. That quite well could happen. However, I don't like watch and wait. I don't like to just sit around and let something develop until it becomes a big problem. So I've started reaching out to other places, and I'm quite proactive when it comes to the disease and what's there and available. So I'm seeing a surgeon in Murcia in Spain, who is a transplant surgeon and a peritoneal malignancy surgeon as well, actually. And I met him at a conference a few years ago, and we kind of became friends. So just in the last few days, my information has been sent over, and I'm now waiting for him to review that and decide whether he wants me to go over and we can do something with this. So yeah, again, you know, we're not back at square one by no means, and this won't affect me too much yet. But I am looking at not second opinions, but other options to try and slow this down.
Well, do keep us, or abreast of how that goes, and we wish all the best of luck with that. But talking about your proactivity, I just very quickly also wanted to touch on something that you have done for the stoma community, being proactive and Yak Life. So I was wondering if you can very quickly kind of, give a little overview as to what that is.
Yeah, so Yaks was set up as our team name when we went to Mongolia as Yorkshire Yaks, and then we just became known as Yaks. So we set up this little brand. One of the things that I found very early on in my stoma journey was clothing was really difficult to find. We had pants that were given from the NHS and these girdles and things that were just horrendous. There were no use whatsoever. Yes, they covered the top, but they didn't give any support. They were just not very good. There is another company in the UK that do some good pants and stuff that give support and everything, but they're just black, white, or neutral colour. That's it. So I thought, why can't we just have something that's really cool and funky and functional? And I just couldn't find anything, so I thought, I'm just going to design something myself. So over the last few years, remember, sometimes I've got to do this between bouts of illness, so it's not my full-time job or anything. But over the years, I've developed something. We now got men's pants, pajamas, ladies' pajamas, kids' pants and pajamas that are all designed in our really cool Yaks branding, and we've put on them things like skin strips around the top to prevent ride down and ride up, and anti-stretch. They give testicular support, whereas others don't. And they're a nice product, and we have a nice brand and everything else. But we've got to that point, like most pre-revenue businesses, where we need funding. We've done this on our own over the last few years and spent a lot of our own money. So we're just undergoing our first funding round now, and hopefully we're fairly confident we'll get an investor, which will then put us into the next stage, which will be production. And my wife Laura can start doing the marketing. I can get round the stoma nurses around the country and do my travelling salesman stuff. And hopefully we can grow that slowly and become a name in the stoma sector.
Amazing. Before we finish, because this is, I think we could go on and on.
Mm-hmm.
You've got so many amazing stories. I do kind of want to just give a shout out to Laura. She just sounds like a real angel. I'm sure you will agree. But she sounds really wonderful. But before we finish, my final question for you is, what would you say, and we ask this to everybody, we just kind of like as a nod, is what would you say to somebody who has stoma surgery coming up, what they can expect, what they should be aware of?
I think firstly, don't overthink it or worry about it. It's fine. Yeah, at first it's a little bit of a change, but you very quickly adapt to that way of life. And I guess something I must mention really is, one thing as a guy we worried about was that being intimate with your partner and things like that. Will they still fancy me? How's this going to work? That kind of thing. The only person that's worrying about it is you. They won't care at all, and it just becomes the norm. So very quickly it just becomes perfectly normal and you manage it fine. Don't worry about it too much. There's some great stuff out there to support it. There's some great people around there, and it doesn't impact on your life in any way whatsoever. It's just ever so slightly different. That's all.
Fantastic. Adam, thank you so much for being a guest. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we wish you all the best.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much.
Have you seen the new Ostique skins yet? Ostique skins are revolutionary ostomy pouch covers that were created to make the wearer feel confident, sexy and powerful in all of life's moments. From moments of intimacy to lounging by the pool, conquering a workout or simply heading out to lunch, skins have you covered. Even better, they're compatible with all major colostomy and ileostomy bags. Ostique skins are available in a range of colours and skin tones, and they're made from a revolutionary material that's completely waterproof, high quality, soft and comfortable. Skins are easy to use, even with reduced dexterity, and they work with both closed and drainable bags. Plus, skins are also environmentally friendly and vegan. There are 4 bundles available to buy now, and you can also purchase individual skins. Head to ostique.co.uk to find out more.